After an excellent showing in his first Soviet championship at the age of only 19, Mikhail Tal came back in 1957 and won the Soviet championship at the age of 20. The tournament was fantastic and Tal won many brilliant games. We're going to look in this video at his win on the black side of the Benoni against Bukuti Gurgenidze. Gurgenidze plays d4 and Tal responds with his trademark Benoni. He doesn't actually have a trademark, but he made this opening so famous, he's probably the most famous name associated with it, that he really does deserve a trademark, I think. The Benoni, if you're not familiar with it, involves the exchange of the e-pawn and the c-pawn. Now, this structure is really dynamic, really imbalanced, a lot of fun, and it has lots of creative potential available for both sides. Obviously, that's why Tal loved it. He liked the tactical chances he gets from it. Also, in the 50s when this game was played, there wasn't as much opening theory, there wasn't as much computer analysis, so the scope for creativity was really, really broad in the Benoni especially. In the Benoni, black is going to get some dark square control, which he cements with the move d6 and a kingside fianchetto. And meanwhile, white is going to establish additional presence in the center with a very nice pawn center. Probably this does favor white, but again, very dynamic, very imbalanced. If you like the kind of positions that Tal gets, you should consider the Benoni. So bishop e2 is now played from Gurgenidze, and it's not a bad move, but it's also not the most potent move. Very potent these days is considered pawn h3 followed by bishop d3 and castling. It's very hard for black to get counterplay in this line, but you do have to know what you're doing for both sides. Probably black is okay, but you really need to know the theory. Instead, Gurgenidze plays this bishop e2 move, and both players castle. Tal now plays rook e8, putting pressure on e4, and Gurgenidze plays knight d2. This both defends the e4 pawn and avoids potential exchanges after a move like bishop g4. You have more space, so you're probably trying to avoid exchanges as white most of the time. Also, the knight might eye the c4 square when if you can play a move like a4 and establish kind of an outpost where you can't be annoyed by a b5 pawn advance, the knight could be really, really good. So the knight maneuver here is a really good strategic idea worth knowing in Benoni-like positions. Now, Tal engages in his own knight maneuver with knight to a6. I've never really had success with this plan, but Tal has, and many other players who have played the Benoni have had success with this. The idea is generally to pull the knight back to c7. You're not trying to get into b4 most of the time. And from c7, you'll be able to achieve a really important advance, pawn to b5. That's a crucial idea in the Benoni. I find this to be a little bit slow, so it's not my favorite way to play the Benoni, but Tal made it work and he played it a lot in the 50s, so it certainly deserves further analysis, especially by me, who could really benefit from understanding it more. So rook e1 now, knight c7, pawn a4, and b6. This is a nice positional move. Worth mentioning here is that you do not play a6 trying for b5, which you want to achieve because of a5, and you lock this pawn in. Even if you get to play this later, the en passant capture here is going to produce a good structure for white, even if you get the b6 pawn back right away. This structure gives black less counterplay on the queen side than he will get if he can achieve a later pawn b5. So b6 intends a6 and then b5. Queen c2 is now played and Tal senses an opportunity. The queen has left this diagonal, so Tal jumps in there thinking, now's my chance. I'm going to change the direction of my attack. I've been playing on the queen side. Now I'm going to try and play on the king side. He's obviously thinking about the dark squares with moves like queen h4 and bishop d4. At this point, I think Gurgenidze clearly makes a tactical error, but I think he also makes a positional error. What he should have done was played bishop takes g4, and after bishop takes g4, black just doesn't have a lot of counterplay here. You're trying for dark squared counterplay on the king side, but you really only have two pieces that can put any pressure on the king side. This bishop doesn't really do anything. And this knight also is not participating in any pressure on the king side. So the upshot is that this ends up being really quite favorable to white, and you should go for this. Instead, Gurgenidze decides to play h3, thinking he'll push the knight back. When the knight goes back, he'll just be doing well, and he's avoiding exchanges this way. The problem is he's missed knight takes f2! Exclamation point. Very, very nice move. If you watch many of Tal's games in the Benoni, you should be familiar with this kind of idea. Sacrifices to rip open the dark squares are very common, and they're certainly common in the games of other players in the Benoni as well. So actually, Gurgenidze should have declined capturing the knight. He could have played knight f3 here. This knight is still looking to get trapped. To get it out here, you can play bishop takes c3 to eliminate the defense of e4 and then take. But after bishop d3 and the knight pulls back in a trade, you can get some counterplay over here when all of the white pieces are kind of hopping, putting pressure on the king side, and the rook can come in and participate as well, and you can create some kind of an attack. You're down 2 pawns, but you have some play. It's hard for me to go for a line like this. I probably would have taken the knight on f2, but this is actually a better line, and it's probably the line that Tal would have gone for. I think he certainly would have preferred to be down 2 pawns with some counterplay than to accept the knight sacrifice on f2, which Gurgenidze does. So after king takes f2, queen h4 check is the point. Bishop d4 check actually also worked for similar reasons. And here the king wants to move, but it needs to defend e1, so that's a little bit difficult. G3 here doesn't really work. After bishop d4 check and the king moves, here a nice move is queen h5 check. If the king had gone somewhere else, or whatever it does now, basically h3 is always falling with check, and when it does, actually white's getting mated. So playing g3 is just not an option. It leaves this pawn undefended. However, after queen h4 check, king f1 to keep this rook defended, Tal plays bishop d4 with a very obvious threat and an inconvenient threat of queen f2 checkmate. You would think that with so many minor pieces that you would have many ways to defend against the checkmate, but you actually only have one clumsy way. The knight back to d1, you're pulling pieces back to the first row. This is a good point to pause the video and ask yourself what you would play to continue the attack. I mean, it's not like if you play a simple move, you won't get refuted. Knight f3 here would trade pieces off and end your attack, so you must play with vigor in this position. So, hopefully you found what Tal played and played queen takes h3, exclamation point. Also, bishop takes h3 is good for the same reason, but this is both cooler and better because the queen is more potent here on h3 than the bishop would be. The main point is, of course, that pawn takes runs into a very nice mate. If you've never seen this checkmate, it's called Boden's mate, where the 2 bishops act like a pair of scissors and just catch the king and lop off its head right there. Checkmate on the spot. Look up Boden's mate if you want to see more incredible examples of this checkmate. So because you cannot take the queen because of checkmate, that means that Tal now has 2 pawns for his sacrifice knight, and he's obviously in a position to construct a massive attack. He's also immediately threatening checkmate with queen to h1. The upshot is that this is a winning attack for Tal, but of course it takes excellent moves to finish things off. The only move here is bishop f3. Which helps defend this, of course. Now, queen to h1 is not mate because you can run to e2, so you're allowing yourself some freedom. After bishop f3, we get queen h2 because now the queen was hanging. You could have taken the queen now. So the queen steps up. There's an idea of queen g1 check. There are a ton of threats in this position. Knight takes d5, for example, is an immediate threat because you cannot take because queen g1 would be mate because you can't open the e-file. There's also ideas of bishop a6, which is very, very strong, and the bishop could potentially come in on the king side as well. And f5 is worth mentioning. All of these are just too much. You can't defend against all these threats. Gurgenidze tries the move knight to e3 in this position, shutting off this bishop, adding defense to d5, also supporting c4 to help deal with bishop a6. So you really couldn't ask for a better defensive try. Tal does play f5 though, and this pawn can't be captured, so he's going to be able to open more lines of attack against the white king. The knight goes to c4 here, which also allows this bishop to participate. So these are good tries from Gurgenidze, but he just doesn't have enough time to arrange a proper defense. Pawn takes e4, and the only good way to recapture is, of course, bishop takes e4. Now bishop a6, which creates a ton of pressure, of course, and it also opens up this rook to potentially join in the attack as well. One idea I like and want to show is rook a3 here, a defensive try that Gurgenidze didn't try here, runs into rook takes e4, which is very nice. Actually, I think rook takes e4 would have been good against a few defensive tries from Gurgenidze. Queen takes e4, rook e8. You're down a full rook, but your pieces are humming. Of course, a big idea here is just to take this knight, and if you have to capture back with the knight on e3, you're getting checkmated. So you want to pull your queen back to defend this knight so that after a capture you can take back with the queen. And now a very nice move is just knight takes d5. For the same reason that the knight wasn't going to be a proper defender here, you also can't take here because of checkmate, or queen h1 checkmate. All of that means that you basically can't move anything as white here. There are a ton of threats. Knight f4 is a biggie, potentially rook f8. Even knight c3 is actually a fantastic threat here that interferes with the defense of c4 and with the defense of e3. All of this means that despite being up a rook, white is totally toast here. If you want to look more at this position, I encourage it. Try to find a defense. Unfortunately, there isn't one, but trying to find one is instructive. So after bishop a6, Gurgenidze pulls his attacked bishop back on e4, pulling it back to f3. Tal just builds up rook e5, rook a3, and he doubles up rook a2, e8. Bishop d2 is now tried. There wasn't a better move. You could try king e2 here, but then bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, queen h6 was actually nice, and there's just no way to deal with all of the pressure here on the attacked knight. You're going to have to give it up, and you'll actually just be down 2 pawns in an endgame. That's about the best you can do here. After the doubling of rooks on e8, Gurgenidze tries bishop d2, and now Tal is able to finish things with tactical force. You can pause your video if you want to figure out what he played here, which is the strongest move. He plays knight takes d5, which is great. The last piece that wasn't kind of directly participating in the attack hops in, capturing the pawn on d5 here. Of course, you can't take with the knight because, again, checkmate. So the bishop takes, and this is check, but now the rook captures. Tal has won another pawn, so he now has 3 pawns for his piece. He's not even down material at this point, and he threatens all kinds of things like rook to f5 check. Again, you can't capture because of checkmate. Just keep throwing that theme out there. Gurgenidze tries king e2, running with this king. This is, really hoping that you can get it together, but of course you can't. There's just nothing better to try. Bishop takes e3 here, and now rook takes e3. The rook on a3 comes over, and bishop takes c4, and Gurgenidze resigns right here. A correct resignation, because capturing the bishop walks into queen takes, and this isn't quite checkmate, but after the king goes to the only escape square he has, you can take here on d2, and that is checkmate. Fantastic attack from Tal. Great illustration of his success with the Benoni, of his power with dark square attacks, and how in a position like this, when all of your pieces are humming, even if you're down a piece, you can afford to build up. Your opponent just doesn't have a good way to untangle when you have this much pressure. If you liked the video, please do subscribe and hit the bell to be notified of future videos, and also check out the playlist, which has more Tal games for you to enjoy.